I guess just terrifying that Reform got so many votes. I think Keir Starmer is basically as right-winged as Boris Johnson was, only slightly left.
Welcome to Bristol. It's one of Britain's largest cities, but it was only 3% away from seeing a huge electoral moment. 6,000 votes. That's how close Reform UK came within of winning the mayoralty for the West of England from Labour. So we've come here to find out why Bristol and the West of England gave Labour another chance, as the government held on by the skin of their teeth. But before we examine the results, let's quickly take a closer look at the city. Bristol is one of the wealthiest cities in the UK, with a GDP per capita of £44,000. But it's also an area of great inequality. It also faces a severe housing crisis. Bristol is the least affordable city in the UK in terms of rent, with tenants spending an average of 57.5% of their monthly salary on housing. Private rents in Bristol have increased by 52% over the last decade, whilst wages have only risen by 24%. On average, Bristol residents now need almost 9 times their annual salary to buy a house. Historically, Bristol has been a Labour stronghold, but recent years have seen a much more nuanced political landscape emerge. At the 2024 election, Green Party co-leader Carla Denyer unseated Labour's Thangham Debonair in the seat of Bristol Central. The Green Party also became the largest party at the City Council. But how do people feel about life in Bristol?
What do you think is the biggest issue in Bristol right now?
Housing. I think housing affects most people.
People can't afford to rent in Bristol anymore. You know, I personally live with family and I wouldn't be able to afford to rent in Bristol.
Rent is just ridiculous. Like, you can't rent a flat. Like, you know, you can't afford to rent anywhere. Rooms are like £750, £800 just for a room. You're talking somebody might take home £1,500, £1,600 a month, and how can they afford a room? Like, you know, and then you've got couples sharing a room because that's the only way that it can live, like in Bristol.
Homelessness is quite a big one. And Bristol's always had a really bad drug problem, I guess, so homelessness and drugs, but they kind of are a vicious circle, I suppose. So.
The previous mayoralty was won by Labour's Dan Norris, but the Labour position this time was complicated by his arrest on suspicion of rape, child sex offences, child abduction and misconduct in a public office. He has since been suspended by the Labour Party whilst inquiries continue. They also haven't been helped by their unpopular start to life in power, with their polling ratings dropping. But the threat to Labour at the mayoralty election didn't just come from the Green Party. Reform UK also made major inroads with its candidate, businessman and co-founder of Leave.eu, Aaron Banks. Throughout the election, it seemed like it could be a 3-horse race, and into the early hours it proved too close to call. But in the end, Labour's candidate Helen Godwin came out on top with 25% of the vote. However, Reform UK and the Greens put in a significant challenge to the traditional status quo, with the Tory party finishing 4th. The voter turnout was also down 6% on the 2021 election to just 30% of residents, meaning fewer than 1 in 3 people voted at this election. Reform's 22.1% of the vote, within 6,000 of the Labour candidate, is undeniably impressive from a standing start, and added to a significant night for the party, winning the by-election in Runcorn and their first mayoralty in Lincolnshire. But why did the residents of Bristol give Labour another chance? And how do they feel about the rise of Reform?
I think it's very much a protest vote. I think it all goes back to Brexit, and the Conservative Party started that sort of movement, and Farage has built on that. I don't think it's good for Britain. Not a long-term thing. It just seems to me a protest vote against illegal immigrants.
I've been a bit disappointed. Yeah, I think they also seem to be cowering to Reform a lot. I don't know, I've just seen a lot of their social media seem to be constantly saying, oh, we're doing this, we're tackling immigration, constantly looking at what Reform are saying and trying to just make themselves look a little bit like they're also doing that. And I think they, Labour for me is an anti-immigration party like Reform is. It seems to have been cowering to that a little bit.
Big news for Reform. I think that it's something that we need to look at properly because, in my opinion, Reform are kind of manipulating the working class. Labour and Keir Starmer have not stayed true to a lot of things that they seem to be campaigning for throughout the Tory leadership, especially things like protest rights, trans rights.
Why were you tempted to vote Reform?
Well, they seem to be gaining ground. You know, they seem to have some good ideals, which the Conservatives have not really had over the years. But they need more votes, obviously. But they're making headway gradually in the coming years, I'm sure of it.
I've never really been a fan of Nigel Farage or any of that kind of party stuff, so kind of disappointing, I suppose, but it's so close. Good that they didn't win, but it's annoying that they're as close as it is.
I guess just terrifying that Reform got so many votes is obviously, but I think it's just a general trend that we're seeing because the far right in general are getting gains everywhere in the world, not just in the country.
So you don't have much hope in Labour turning things around?
No, it wouldn't surprise me if Reform won the next election, or if there was a Reform and Conservative, joining coalition. I think Keir Starmer is basically as right wing as Boris Johnson was, only slightly left of that. So people have kind of like no other options.
For Labour, the West of England Mayoralty election may have to be seen as a warning shot. Reform UK and the Greens put together a significant challenge to Labour's authority in the area. And if the government cannot improve on its unpopular start to life in power, could this be the start of things to come?